We first wanted to, recognize everything that's going on and just show our appreciation for you tuning in during this time and all of the challenges that you're currently going through. We're really grateful that we're able to continue to bring you educational content during this time. So we just really appreciate you tuning in. This is our 2020 Health Links webinar series, and today we'll be talking about the silent epidemic of eating disorders in the workplace. Wanted to start with a little bit of information about us. Health Links is a mentoring program that champions health and safety at work. We offer evidence-based healthy workplace certification as well as advising to help organizations achieve total worker health. We're a nonprofit based in the Center for Health Work and Environment at the Colorado School of Public Health. Those of you who are in our Health Links network are probably familiar with our benchmarks. If not, that's okay. I just wanted to give you a brief introduction. These are the 6 different areas that we assess and advise on in Health Links. And just wanted to point out that today our topic of health programs and policies, or our topic of eating disorders, falls under the benchmark of health programs and policies. We talk about a lot of different topics in this, but 2 of them are mental health and nutrition, both of which the topic of eating disorders is important to consider in your planning and implementing of programs. A brief agenda for you today. We will have a presentation by Amanda Kujawa and Sabrina Scanga. And then we'll transition into a Q&A discussion. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please put these in the Q&A box in Zoom, and we'll get to those at the end. And then I'll be closing us out with a little bit of a wrap up and a preview of what we have coming up next. Some brief general housekeeping before we get started. Everyone will be kept on mute throughout the duration of the presentation. So if you have barking dogs or running children around, don't worry, we can't hear or see you. So just keep that in mind. Use the chat function for any technical issues that you have. I'll be kind of floating around in the background and I'm happy to help you if you're having any issues. Again, if you have a question for our speakers, please use the Q&A function. That's where I'll be drawing all my questions from for the Q&A discussion. Wanted to also let you know that this webinar is being recorded and we will be uploading that to YouTube afterwards. You will receive a follow-up email with the YouTube link later this week. That will also include the presentation slides, a 1-page resource, and information on how to claim continuing education credits. Wanted to also mention that there will be a survey at the end of this webinar. We would love if you could take a minute to complete this. It helps inform our future webinars so we can continue to make improvements over time. And then hopefully you know this, but if not, SHRM and CHES credits are available. Again, information on how to claim those credits will be going out in the follow-up email later this week. All right, I'm so excited to introduce to you our wonderful speakers. We have our very own Amanda Kujawa from the center. Amanda works to highlight and disseminate the center's research and continuing education opportunities through design and digital strategy. She received a BA in Communication Arts with a certificate in Digital Studies from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her academic and professional experiences center around a desire to build connections between people and ideas through purposeful design and strategic communications. She has an interest in how diverse audiences engage with their physical and digital environments and how to tailor messaging to tell the stories that have an impact. And then we have Sabrina Scanga. So Sabrina received her BA in psychology with a minor in nutrition from the Metropolitan State University of Denver. Her devotion to the eating disorder community began with her own recovery journey that led to volunteer work at a residential treatment center in Florida, Lavon Mason. Sabrina's dedication to mental health support and awareness solidified when she founded the Eating Disorder Foundation in 2017. As program director, Sabrina works to develop and sustain programs that educate and support individuals and family members affected by mental health and eating disorders. Thank you both for being here with us today. And Amanda, we can go ahead and stop you.
Thank you, Katie. I am really excited to talk about this issue today and bring this conversation into the workplace. Unfortunately, eating disorders and disordered eating are a lot more common than we might realize. And I think that the workplace can be a really supportive place to offer resources for people who are struggling. I offer my gratitude to my own workplace for allowing me and really encouraging me to be open and honest about my own experience and how different aspects of the center encouraged some of my disordered behaviors, and now how aspects of the center are really supporting and shaping my recovery. And before we get started here, I really want to offer all of you a lot of compassion. I know this is a really challenging time for all of us, and especially if you are struggling with an eating disorder or support someone who is. I know this webinar might feel very heavy for you, so I just want to offer you compassion and gratitude for still tuning in today.
Thank you so much, Amanda, and thank you, Katie. I am delighted to be here with you. When you reached out to me, I was just really excited to collaborate and share more information educationally and supportive-wise to just additional people in the community. I know that sharing a personal experience really takes such courage and vulnerability. So I want to just start by saying thank you to Amanda. I know that there are a lot of people that are going to be tuning in today that will be able to relate with a lot of the things that you share and really make a difference. In my experience working with eating disorders, this is one of the most powerful tools that exists to shedding some light on something that is misunderstood and not talked about very much. This time, as you mentioned, Amanda, is really interesting and really unique. I think everyone is hyper aware of our surroundings, which maybe some of us are always that way, but that might not be the case for everybody. So right now we have sort of a unique bond. We're sharing an occurrence in time, and what's similar is that this fear of not knowing what comes next. And depending on the skills that we have internally and some tools that we have externally, we respond to times like this really differently. Something such as a virus that we're not in control of, it's really external, is driving us sort of as a society and as a world to work together to find what precautions we can take, even though we don't really have all the answers yet. I can't think of a better time than this as a unique opportunity to discuss how we connect and encourage and support each other as human beings. So today we're going to specifically talk about eating disorders, something that many people, much like COVID-19, don't have a lot of information about. It's complex, there's layers. As I observe people, over the last couple months talking about the virus, with the understanding of not knowing what comes next or, in confusion, I've been wondering if we can talk about something that we don't understand, like a virus, a sickness, what keeps us from discussing and talking about other illnesses such as mental health or as eating disorders? Both are complex, both we're still learning about. So I'm really excited to be doing this today because I think it is a really appropriate time to sort of dive into how can we make sort of some systemic changes in how we support each other as people. Before we do kind of dive in, I want to make a brief disclaimer about some of the things that we might mention today, discussing certain specific foods, psychological illnesses, some self-harm, and suicidal ideation. So if you have experience with some of these and these are known triggers to you, please take care of yourself, utilize some of those resources that you might already have, and then we're going to provide some resources today through the webinar. I think Amanda and I are here to help provide accessible and easy changes that can be implemented. So I also want to take a moment that we can set some realistic expectations from this webinar. Both Amanda and I discussed, we don't want to do this to shame anyone or any organization for ways that they have been or have not been providing services. We don't expect anybody to be an expert on eating disorders before this webinar, and especially after. There's just far too much information to be covered in a really brief amount of time. But I think what we both agreed on is that avoiding the topic altogether doesn't really work either. So I'm really happy to be here alongside Amanda to provide some insight and potential impacts that you could take into your work environment, starting as soon as today if you wanted to. So thank you so much. Amanda, would you like to kind of start just sharing a little more about a little more personal things about you and your experience with your struggle.
Sure. So just going into the shortened version of my journey a little bit. I was pretty privileged that my eating disorder didn't start in childhood. I was raised with a pretty intuitive and healthy relationship with food. My journey into disordered eating started in high school. I went on my first diet during swim season and restricted pretty heavily and lost quite a bit of weight fairly quickly. And then when the season ended, I gained it all back and then some, and then kind of entered into this binge restrict cycle that lasted all throughout college. And then the next few years, I moved to Denver, started working for the School of Public Health, and my eating disorder kind of morphed into more restriction. I limited the kinds of foods that I allowed myself to eat. And then I got really into pretty compulsive over-exercising, which, especially living in Denver with a very active lifestyle people have, it really wasn't seen as a problem. I didn't see it as a problem until it became a big problem. And so I knew I had some sort of disorder tendency. So I sought out an eating disorder therapist, and she diagnosed me with anorexia. And I was pretty soon admitted into a partial hospitalization program at a treatment center here in Denver. So I was in that program for about 3 months. It 100% saved my life. Really, probably the hardest thing I've ever done, but totally worth it. And now where I am now is about a year out of treatment and still on this recovery journey. There are ups and downs. Unfortunately, recovery is not a straight line. It's very messy, especially during COVID. It's brought up some challenges, but I have a lot of hope for a full recovery for anyone out there struggling, and myself included.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you had that experience with treatment, it being very positive and helping you find healing from what you were struggling with before. I know that you and I had discussed, and it's really important to mention, recovery is possible. And, this illness really represents differently in each individual person. But there's such value and importance in sharing the message of hope, and that recovery can happen. It looks really different for everyone, but it is possible.
Right.
So I'll share a little bit now, kind of as Amanda, as you share with us your experience, I'll kind of talk some general highlights as best as I can, because I know you and I could talk about this all day with everybody. There's just so much to discuss. But to kind of give a brief overview of really what are eating disorders. So they're really the development of a really complex preoccupation with food and body that are directly related to thoughts and emotions. So there are a few things that are important to know about eating disorders before we get into some terminology. And I'm going to share a slide that kind of helps people see and understand really kind of how fluid this can be. But the important things I hope people can take away today are that anybody can struggle with an eating disorder. Some of the myths out there and the stigmas are that this illness is just for a certain particular type of person in a very particular looking body. And let's bust that myth right now. Eating disorders don't discriminate against anybody. So someone in any shape, any gender, all ages of people. We see really young, unfortunately, and then some people develop their eating disorders much later in life. So knowing that can be really helpful to understand, okay, this isn't just targeted towards one particular type of person. All socioeconomic status, race, everything. So we can't, that being said, it's really impossible for us to look at someone and tell what's going on. Even an eating disorder professional can't look at somebody and say, oh, I know what's going on with them just by their appearance. So it's really important for us to keep a non-judgmental and non-assumptive approach when we're discussing all mental health, but in particular eating disorders, because there is something directly connected with, oh, I can look at somebody's body and see what's going on inside of them. Eating disorders are incredibly, they have deep impacts on us psychologically and medically. They are dangerous. So all all across the spectrum of eating disorders, which I'll show you in a moment, can damage us internally, and these are things that, again, we don't see going on. So some of the leading health issues that happen are heart failure, kidney failure, osteoporosis, and then they can be fatal illnesses. So what we do know is the earlier that somebody can catch warning signs and see that they're struggling, receive the appropriate support and professional help, that the better the chances that they can heal and recover. So I'm going to share my screen now and show everybody a bear with me for a moment. Where did it go? A slide that is going to show intuitive eating on one side, disordered eating in the middle, and then eating disorders on the other side. Okay. Can you see that, Amanda?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Thanks for bearing with me. Okay, so I like to show this spectrum of eating behavior to help people understand that it doesn't require a diagnosis to be struggling. A lot of people don't have access to see a professional who specializes in eating disorder, or even a medical doctor that understands eating disorders. So when learning about this illness, I like to show, here's the whole graph of what we're looking at. On the left-hand side is sort of what we hope for a human. Really, what's under the selection is a lot of flexibility and balance in their life. There's not a lot of rigidity or restriction in the relationship and the ideas and rules around food and exercise, or how they might feel about their body. In the middle, disordered eating is sort of where diet culture is going to live. Now, please understand, many of us have sort of interacted with some of these things because it is a huge piece of our culture. And it doesn't seem to be that there's something wrong with it. But what we know is that diets actually really don't work. And they're sort of bring the question of, what's the purpose that I'm wanting to be on a diet? And oftentimes the answer to that is to modify my body, to change something. There must be something that I'm not satisfied with, so I want to find a way to modify that. What we know and research shows us really time and again is that those things aren't sustainable and they don't work. And what they end up doing is sort of leaving us with these ideas of, gosh, I tried this kind of restrictive diet, or I tried doing this thing that I thought was going to be healthy, and it may have lasted while I was doing it, but it wasn't really sustainable. So now I'm kind of confused with what my body actually wants as far as nutrition and exercise. So this is sort of an area where I imagine a lot of us have explored some, or we get messages from the media that tell us things might be good or bad, that aren't all very scientifically based, because our bodies are so different. It's really hard to do that, like give us a fact for every single human body. But this is also an area where we can kind of, depending on the individual, we can sort of lead into developing a diagnosable eating disorder. So on the right-hand side of this spectrum, you see some of the terms might look familiar, and some of them might be relatively new to you. So anorexia nervosa is a heavily restrictive type eating disorder. Bulimia nervosa also begins with restriction. Actually, all eating disorders really do begin with restricting. So in someone who's struggling with bulimia heavily restricts their intake in nutrients And then their body eventually is going to take in kind of a mass amount of food via what we call a binge, and then they'll find some way to compensate for that behavior. And oftentimes there's kind of feelings wrapped up in this of shame and guilt. You know, I shouldn't have done what I just did. Now I need to find a way to undo it. And that can look really a lot of different ways. I think the most common ways that people hear and understand are by purging, but it can also be by over-exercising or other various ways of compensation. But the idea is there's this feeling I need to make up for what I just did, as if, you know, it was something bad and I need to be punished for it. Binge eating disorder, again, also going to kind of represent as long periods of restriction with a desire to not binge, but then eventually engaging in some binges with the absence of a compensation. Now, the other four that are listed on here, I imagine are a little less common for people unless they've been directly affected or know someone. Avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, otherwise called ARFID, is an eating disorder that really presents as heavily restrictive eating disorder, kind of looking like anorexia as well. But a lot of people who struggle with ARFID might not also have the sort of the body image struggles as the other eating disorders. Their struggles can sometimes really focus on an intense fear inside about food. It might be some development of a rule. This food is really bad because it contains this. It can also be really different things like, I avoid certain colored foods or certain foods with certain textures or something like that. So what's important I want to mention before I briefly run through the last three is all of these diagnoses, it's not necessary that somebody falls into one category and stays in that category. This can be really, really confusing and challenging for someone who is being diagnosed with an eating disorder to validate that they deserve support and that they are really sick enough to receive help. There's a wonderful book written by a medical physician in Denver. Her name is Jennifer Gaudiani, and the title of the book is Sick Enough. And it really goes through examples of cases of people who are struggling with an eating disorder, but might internally have these reasons that, well, I'm not sick enough because I didn't get diagnosed properly. Insurance told me that I didn't meet the criteria. The truth is, if you're struggling with that relationship, then you deserve help. So the last three here, eating disorder is not otherwise specified, is going to be is another example of where people kind of flow through some of these behaviors cross the diagnosis. So if someone's not fitting the criteria in just one category, they might be using other behaviors as well. They're still struggling with an eating disorder. So, if there needs to be a term put on that somewhere, this one can be a catch-all. But again, I want to mention, for the individual or for someone who's trying to support someone, these terms are less important than the truth that the person is needing some support with the relationships that they have with themselves and with food. Diabulimia and orthorexia are some newer terms. We're continuing to learn so much about eating disorders, and it is helpful for us to have this terminology so that as treatment professionals, we can look at how do we better serve and how do we better treat people more specifically to their specific needs. So this is where terms can really be helpful. But I always like to play devil's advocate that, if you're struggling, then you deserve help. Amanda, is there anything you want to add?
No, I think you covered it all.
Okay. I wish we had so much more time.
I know.
Okay. So speaking to how eating disorders develop in a person, what do we know about eating disorders right now? Again, it's really challenging because each person is unique and individual. And so when we look at treatment, we also need to consider that. What did you as an individual go through, and how can we help walk you through those stages? I like this sort of Venn diagram that crosses over to show eating disorders incorporate many different things. Research does show us that there is a genetic component. So there are things, for example, if we know someone in our family has had a blood disorder or has had breast cancer, we can now be better prepared to look for those things. These are things that we don't get to choose. These are outside of our control. So genetics and connections with our family plays a piece in this. It's not a guarantee that someone in your family has struggled, so you're going to, but it's something that can be helpful for us to look at. The next important connection is a psychological piece. So really, this is a lot to do, some internal, and a lot does connect with our genetics, but also external things, such as how did we grow up? What environment were we in? What kind of skills did we have when we were being raised in how to communicate with others, in friendship development? All of those things, when we find that we're struggling with something and we look back into where's the foundation, what are the skills that I actually learned in the beginning? Maybe this might lead me to some of my confusion now and behaviors that I develop that might be maladaptive. Trauma, for example, is something that is fairly prevalent in a lot of people who struggle with eating disorders. These behaviors can be described as really something to protect the individual. That might sound strange to someone who doesn't have an eating disorder, but really these behaviors, even neurologically, can provide sort of a soothing mechanism for the body. So when engaging in a behavior, because I might have previously been through something that has taught me, oh, now's the time I need to protect myself, so I'm going to start engaging in these behaviors that I've relied on before. Now, this can also lead into a change in our emotions and a change in our mood. There is a lot of correlation between eating disorders and anxiety and depression and other illnesses. Eating disorders really don't stand alone. So when we're looking at recovery and helping somebody, we kind of fan out and look at all these things that might have happened in the individual's life, and what skills they may or may not have, so we can start teaching those. And then the last one, and these kind of bubbles can be broken down into so much deeper detail, but I think this is a really good starting point. Culture can play a role in sort of validating the messages that we have inside. So if we have a message somehow that my body is not good enough, or I am not smart enough, really I'm not enough in any way, fill in the blank, the messages that we might receive maybe on social media, or messages that we receive, within being productive and at work, be the best you can be, and if you're not that, then you're not good enough. That message might not affect somebody, but if we have these internal truths, that can really validate, wow, I'm not good enough over and over again. So to put it in aspect of when we're looking at recovery, we want to look at culture too and say, okay, let's dive in and talk about things internally that might be happening or that you might be confused about. And then when we're facing the world that's not quite adjusted to those expectations, how do we deal with that? How do we manage that? Or how do we advocate for ourselves? So I'd love to ask Amanda now, As far as that social piece and culture, maybe to share a little bit, if you have an example, whether that be in the workplace or just how was that for you in your experience with an eating disorder?
Yeah, so culture definitely played a role. I, like everyone else, as you mentioned, live in and am affected by diet culture, which, if you don't know what that is, it's this that really worships thinness and equates it to health and moral virtue. And so weight loss is promoted as a means of attaining higher status. And I, like so many others, fell victim to the compulsion to spend a massive amount of my time just trying to shrink my body. And so over the period of a decade, that kind of culminated in developing anorexia. But even then, with our culture's kind of obsession with thinness and clean eating, I never saw myself as sick. And I just thought that I had this control over my body. And I felt kind of a sick pride in that as well. So culture, didn't cause my eating disorder, but it was definitely, one of the factors.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It is, as you said, like there's so many pieces to it. Okay. So we have some quick statistics that we can share just to show everybody the prevalence of eating disorders, whether you've heard about them before or have been personally affected or know someone. So the first statistic here listed is at least 30 million people of all ages and genders suffer from an eating disorder in the United States. To break down that number, it represents 20 million women and 10 million men. And this number is only people who have reported and been diagnosed. So truly this number is much larger. I believe the count worldwide is 70 million. And again, if you think about that spectrum where people, maybe they have the access or, they've been able to receive a diagnosis and go to treatment, that's this number that we're looking at. But there's a lot of people that might kind of be within that spectrum that aren't counted in this number. So it really does affect a lot of people. And these statistics are brought from the National Eating Disorders Association. Every 62 minutes, at least one person dies as a direct result of an eating disorder. And again, I sadly imagine that number is higher. Eating disorders have the highest mortality rate of any mental health illness. And I'll mention that the opioid epidemic has really approached that number, and in the last year, I believe has even surpassed. But again, to kind of show within mental health, eating disorders are really dangerous, and I don't think that key point is discussed enough. That, I'm just doing these things and it's okay, trying to modify my body. Like there's a lot of severe medical complications that can happen from doing these things. And then 1 in 5 of those suffering from anorexia nervosa died by suicide. So that's another number that we felt important to share that doesn't get enough vocal attention, because I think it's a bit frightening for people to approach, wondering how do we hold space for this. But as I mentioned earlier, I think the one
in here a little bit. I just want to pause on that statistic and just share a little bit about my experience with suicidal ideation and self-harm. I think it's really important that we pause and talk about it a little bit more, just because we don't talk about it, and the stigma that shrouds guilt. And so I struggled with self-harm in high school. I went through pretty major depression and found that self-harm was a way I could numb out and not feel some really hard emotions that I was going through. And then as my eating disorder began, my eating disorder kind of took place of self-harm in that it allowed me to numb out as well. it was brought up again in college after I got assaulted. I started numbing out from that trauma, using my eating disorder more and more for that. And then going through treatment, as I had to kind of start healing from my eating disorder and letting that go as my form of self-harm, self-harm and suicidal ideation kind of popped up again. And because running for me and restriction was a way I could just turn my brain off from feeling. And so after a decade of not feeling, I had to start feeling all these emotions very strongly. And so I have struggled with suicidation, and I just offer a lot of empathy for folks who are in that dark space. It's not something you can think your way out of. It took me really asking for help and seeking it out and trying to be honest about what my brain was telling me, because I couldn't help myself. And so I want to encourage you all. I know it's hard to talk about. It's hard to admit because of stigma and judgment that we have around it. But if you are struggling with suicidal ideation or self-harm, please just tell someone you trust. There are a lot of resources out there, and I really want you to be able to get the help that you need.
Amanda, I think this is a good time. Thank you so much for sharing that with everyone. I think this is a good time, if it's okay with you, to just briefly do the iceberg metaphor and then start discussing and offering ways that people can address someone that they might be concerned about in the workplace and how they might recognize that someone is struggling with an eating disorder. So really quickly, Amanda and I wanted to share this image because it really helps represent how much is seen on the outside when you're just looking at someone, and then how much is going on underneath. And this really is a very human thing. So all of us have deeper layers. When someone is struggling with something such as an eating disorder, these are some of the examples listed that are going on a bit underneath. And Amanda, I know you just shared some of those. Is there anything really on here that you want to pinpoint and discuss and share with us?
This image is so important and so helpful, I think, for folks to kind of understand an eating disorder a bit better, because all that people see is that maybe you're really obsessed with weight loss or dieting, and it seems maybe really vain that you just want to shrink your body, but that's just a small piece of it. And so for me, it was very much about numbing out from a lot of things that I was feeling and just could not handle feeling. I definitely have some perfectionistic tendencies. I struggle with depression. I have PTSD. And so my eating disorder really served a purpose. And as much as I want to let my eating disorder go, I do still lean on it sometimes when I'm really struggling with those deeper issues that are underneath the water.
Thank you. You mentioned perfectionism, and I think that is such a hot word in eating disorders. And another way I like to say that is black and white thinking. Perfectionism, even that term in itself, I think can be, especially in the workplace, kind of valued or really praised. There are some positive aspects about that word. Oh, you're very detail oriented, you're an achiever, and you'll do it right and you'll do it the best. And that can feel really rewarding inside as an individual as well. Now there's that area where we become unbalanced, where if I don't then do something perfectly, how is that going to impact my day? Is it going to kind of throw me off, or am I able to let it go and say, oh, I did the best I could, now on to the next activity? So it's almost like it's directly affecting our productivity as well as our emotional state. So let's direct this to then how eating disorders affect the workplace. And really what you and I discovered really is how they interact with each other. So that question kind of goes both ways. How does the workplace influence eating disorders, and how do eating disorders influence us in the workplace? Um, so like we mentioned earlier, you can't look at someone and tell what's going on. So how do we tell? Where do we start? Um, there can be, depending, of course, this will always depend on the direct relationship that you have with this person. And please note that any individual, if you're concerned about them, they still deserve the respect in privacy and confidentiality. So when you're maybe noticing changes in someone and you're developing a concern, do your best to try to keep your communication with that person, and not sharing it with others. Of course, that might not be with the intent to harm someone, but if you're seeking maybe to your HR department or seeking professional guidance and saying, how do I help this person? Or really just spending some time to plan a way of how you're going to compassionately approach this person. But we'll give some examples about that later. So some warning signs that we wanted to share with you are really just changes in this individual. Because when the body is malnourished, it is affecting so much of the rest of ourselves, of our personality, of our relationships, how we're interacting in the world. So it can be seen through extreme emotions, changes. Perhaps someone's values are feeling like they're shifting. You're noticing that they're caring less about something that they really cared about before and replacing it with something that really might not feel like them. It might be more direct and upfront. They're discussing a lot, almost kind of all the time. They're talking about their weight, their body, or food, or dieting, or kind of those things. If you notice any kind of specific uncommon things that happen around food, that might be just really avoiding sharing meals or having things. Again, everyone's work environment is a bit different, so you might not have these kinds of opportunities. So kind of just take note of that, again, that personal relationship that you have with the person, and utilize that then to express your concern. Amanda, what, in your experience at the workplace, did anybody approach you, or do you wish they had? I know sometimes when people are struggling with eating disorders, they don't really want to be approached. So will you share a little bit about your experience there?
Sure. So it was a little bit tricky because, especially working in the world of public health, my behaviors weren't seen as necessarily harmful. I was just, exercising a lot. My food, my lunches weren't very nutritious. And, a part of me did not want to be called out. But a part of me was really desperate, especially towards the end, for someone to see and just validate that I was sick. And so I wish someone would have approached me and just, made a gentle comment about my overexercise. And instead of me coming back from exercising over lunch and saying, oh, you're so good for doing that, or you're so disciplined, or, commenting on my lunches that were nowhere near nutritious enough, saying that I had so much willpower, just not using that language and sharing concern instead. And if I denied it, just taking it to HR or leadership so I could get the help that I needed, because just doing it as quickly as possible is the best way to get that employee some help. Otherwise, like me, I will just abruptly disappear for 3 months. And I don't like that I have to make the business case here, but it does affect the workplace in that, someone had to find out how to do my work. It affected my coworkers. They didn't know where I went or why. So addressing it as soon as possible is so important. And I know it can be a really delicate conversation, a really awkward conversation, but it's a potentially life-saving conversation.
You're absolutely right. And I know we're almost running out of time, so I want to just provide an example that you can take away with you right now, because it does feel like a scary thing to approach when maybe you don't know somebody very closely, or you feel like, is this my place? But as you just shared, Amanda, it can be life-saving to just offer someone that you've noticed that something has changed in you. So I'll provide an example. Again, knowing you're not responsible for being an expert on eating disorders, using education hey, well, first thing you want to do is kind of schedule a time that you can be private with this person, so you're not sort of putting them on the spot or other people are tuning in. That you can kind of set a time and just say, I've learned a bit more about eating disorders, and I'm want to share with you that I'm concerned. I certainly can't assume that something is going on, but I've noticed a change in you. And I know that these things can be really serious and have a really serious impact on your medical and your psychological health. I care about you. Is there something I can do? And then really being prepared that person might not be ready, might not even understand and know what's going on with them internally. But what you've just done by doing that is left a pathway of communication, that in the future or when they're ready, they might reach out and say, remember when you brought that up? What did you mean? Like, how can you help me? And now by this workshop, you have resources and references of professionals that you can just directly send them to. So really there's no responsibility to be placed on you directly other than expressing compassion and concern for someone. So even if you really don't understand eating disorders and are never impacted directly by them, you now have something really easy that you can provide for someone who will be in dire need of that one day. Some of the things that Amanda put together. Do you want to discuss quickly if we have time?
Sure. Yeah. Real quick before we go into Q&A, I think it's so important that we talk about how you can create sort of a supportive culture. And really for me, I intended this webinar to be more for leadership and coworkers, but I think I really want to empower the individual as well who might be struggling to kind of try to start combating a little bit of diet culture and how it shapes the way that we're thinking and how we're acting. Just little things that we say, like if we go grab a donut that someone brought in and say, oh, I'm being so bad for eating this. Just that simple thing, it can be really harmful to, not only yourself, but those who might be really struggling with an eating disorder. When we put moral value on food and start to say that like these foods are bad and these foods are good, we're also starting to internalize that word and say, I'm bad for eating because this food is bad. And so just paying attention to how we're talking about food, how we're talking about exercise and our bodies. And if you want to move to as well, I want to make sure we mention workplace wellness programs. I think these can be potentially so harmful for folks, especially over the holidays when we're doing weight loss challenges or, giving points to people if they lose a certain weight or trying not to lose weight during the holidays or at any time. I really encourage you not to have these sort of programs, not to have programs that are focused on weight loss, rewarding people for eating certain foods over other foods, for even taking a certain number of steps can be harmful. I know it sounds, what is the line between someone who might be struggling with an eating disorder and someone who just likes to exercise and eat healthy? But, this can be so different for everyone, and just even encouraging those behaviors and putting a moral worth on food and exercise can be harmful for you even if you don't have an eating disorder. And so I really encourage you to pay attention to your workplace wellness programs.
I like the question. I like to invite people to think about the question, how much are my thoughts of food and my body taking up energy in my day? So if it's something that we're thinking about and we're planning all day long, or we're avoiding because we're afraid of something, maybe being invited out to have lunch with coworkers, maybe being invited to a party, if that's bringing up fear of, I'm going to have to avoid that somehow, that's a good question to look deeper into. So sort of it is, because you're right. There's well, where's that line? Because it's kind of fuzzy well, I'm being healthy, taking care of myself. No, I'm struggling with something. So I like that idea of how much of my day is going into this. And in the workplace, wellness programs, you're right, can be another one of that culture piece that's validating the messages of, oh, do I determine if I'm enough or if I'm not enough based off if I'm successful in this and meeting the needs or requirements or whatever. And to quickly mention this, again, as we said in the beginning, this isn't to put down a lot of these programs. I think people develop with the intention and the hope to encourage people to be more thoughtful and intentional about their relationship with food and health. So like the idea, I can get around and understand, but what actually happens that comes from it can be really dangerous. So kind of changing around some of the wording and the messages can really go a long way. I realized we had some poll questions. Katie, if we still have time, are we able to do that, or is going straight into questions the better option?
I think we should probably move to questions. We've gotten so many, so I would love to get through as many as possible, if that's okay with you both.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Sabrina, if you'll just stop sharing your screen. Great. All right. First, just wanted to say thank you both so much for being here. And Amanda, thank you so much for telling us about your story and being so open and honest with us. I'm sure a lot of us can relate in some way to your story or have loved ones who have gone through something similar. So I really appreciate you being so vulnerable with us and sharing all of that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and dive into some questions. I will say just before I get started that there's so many I won't be able to address all of them, unfortunately, but my email is linked to all of the webinar information you've received. So if you reply to any of those emails, it will go straight to me, and I'm happy to forward any questions on to Amanda or Sabrina and connect you with them if you want direct feedback after this or direct answering of your questions. So. The first question we've gotten kind of in several different ways is surrounding tips to deal with coworkers who are consistently talking about diet, exercise, or you mentioned some of that messaging around the office, if some of that can be triggering. What can people do if they're in that situation?
Sure. So it has happened in my own workplace, and I've kind of, since I've been so open about it in my workplace, I will challenge that and say, you know, I don't want to call people out, but maybe like curious about why we think that way. So why do you feel like you need to go on a diet, or like what? And so maybe just challenging some things. And if I find something really triggering or harmful, I might share that as well. And it's hard to, be that vulnerable, but I think it's so important. And to start to build that culture, it might have to just come from you. If you don't feel like you have the energy to take on that education, that's totally valid. And sometimes I'll just put in my earbuds, or I'll go to the bathroom and just let them have the conversation. I don't have to participate. I don't have to take that on. That's just what someone else chooses to do with their body and with their life, and that's perfectly okay for them to choose that. I just can't choose that for myself because it's not healthy for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Another question that we have coming in is surrounding how leadership can be supportive and some of these struggles that people may experience with a power dynamic, and trying to maybe bring this issue to leadership and or HR, and maybe finding that they're the ones who are pushing maybe these weight loss programs or incentives that coincide with eating behavior, exercise. How can people deal with some of those power dynamics?
Sure. So I mean, that's the point of this webinar, right? Is to try to bring this issue to light, bring it into the workplace. Leadership, and most people aren't aware of this issue. And so we are going to be sending out a one-pager of all these resources and some tips and tricks. And so maybe just sharing that with leadership, sharing a recording of this webinar with leadership, just trying to gently educate people. It's hard when it has to come from below upward, but and if there is a power dynamic, I know that can be tricky, but I think it's so important to take that initiative and share resources and encourage your leadership to do the same. Sabrina, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll add that there are, within Denver, the foundation that I work at does provide free education and trainings. So if it's more comfortable for you to sort of have someone say that you can reach out to us or the National Eating Disorder Association and say, I'd like your help. Can you maybe reach out to my organization and see if they're willing to talk and learn more? And then kind of one-on-one, we can help walk through, like, how do we approach the right person who's going to let us really even just talk about this in the workplace, not come in trying to just uproot and change everything, but really gently say, okay, let's just talk about some ways that we can make this more inclusive for people and not interrupt the entire business structure.
Yeah, that's great. I'm really glad that there are.
I saw.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Oh, sorry. Just want to mention that I did see in the chat function that someone is curious about, still having weight loss wellness programs for those who want to healthily lose weight. And so how to kind of separate the folks that are struggling with eating disorders. And I just want to point out that going on diets and having your body kind of cycle through weight loss and weight gain is so stressful for your body. So it's really not healthy for anyone to go and participate in these weight loss programs. I know it seems counterintuitive and it's just something that we do in the name of health, but that's such a narrow definition of health, and going on a diet is really harmful to your physical body and to your mental health as well. And so I would encourage you, even if you don't have an eating disorder, to not participate in those programs either.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for adding that. And thank you, Sabrina, for pointing out that, we don't have to do this alone. We can reach out to other coworkers or other resources and have that support. And that support exists for employees. So thank you so much. Unfortunately, I don't have time for any more questions. But again, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to connect you to Amanda or Sabrina. I'm just going to really quickly share my screen one last time to give you some information about our upcoming webinars. All right. So the next Health Links webinar that we have coming up is May 20th. It is on resiliency and mental wellness in the workplace. We're really excited to have Dr. Chad Morris, the director of the University of Colorado Behavioral Health and Wellness Program, to speak with us for that. The link to register for this will be in the follow-up email going out later this week. So keep an eye out for that. I wanted to also mention some resources that we have available to you all throughout this time of COVID. So we're doing a COVID-19 town hall series. These happen every Monday at 11 a.m. This coming Monday, the 27th, the topic is employer response and employee support through COVID-19. It's a little bit different if you've tuned into some of our town halls in the past. It's a little bit different in that we have a few organizations who will be sharing some of the challenges that they're going through, concerns that employees have and how they're addressing those. So we really encourage you to tune in for that. I did want to mention that unfortunately CHES and SHRM credits are not offered for our town hall series, just because we're doing them in real time and we unfortunately don't have time to provide those credits, but we really encourage you to tune in. We've gotten positive feedback so far that they've been helpful through this time. Last, just wanted to say thank you again so much for tuning in today. Please take a minute to complete our survey after this. We would love to hear your feedback. I also included our contact email on the screen, so you can reach out to us that way as well if you have any questions. And then wanted to reiterate one more time that there's a follow-up email going out later this week that will include the link to this recording, the PowerPoint slides, the one-page resource that Amanda just talked about, information on how to claim CHES and SHRM credits, and a link to register for the next Health Links webinar. So keep an eye on your inbox for that, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks so much.